Good evening. We're bringing you this edition of the NewsHour Agenda from right outside the Bharat Mandapam, which is inside Pragati Maidan, the venue of tomorrow's all-important G20 meeting. And what is very significant is that at this location of the all day, bringing to you back-to-back breaking news on the developments in relation to updates coming in. This is the joint statement of India and the United States that's coming in. In fact, my colleague Rishabh is going to be with us for more on this. But let me quickly read out for our viewers what is very significant. At this point of time, we can tell you that in this particular statement, the India-US have reaffirmed the close partnership. The statement has appreciated the substantial progress. The US has acknowledged the success of Prime Minister's US visit, and the groundbreaking achievements of the historic visit have also been highlighted. President Biden has also congratulated India for Chandrayaan 3. And let me take this across to Rishabh. Rishabh, this is very significant. Rishabh, this is very significant. The US has congratulated India for Chandrayaan 3. They've also acknowledged the success of PM Modi's visit to the United States. And just within the span of 3 months, President Biden and Prime Minister Modi meeting for the second time. This is not something that is very common, is it?
It is definitely not common. Prime Minister met him on the sidelines of G7 as well, for that matter. June they met in United States. Here in Delhi today they met. And the long statement that has come in talks about all the important issues. UNSC, reforms in UNSC is one of the things that they discuss. How Quad can change dynamics in the world, that is what they discuss. Free and inclusive Indo-Pacific, that is one thing that India and US have been partnering for long. That both the leaders discussed. Apart from that, if we talk about what they discussed, Chandrayaan 3, it is a humongous scientific success, and US do understand, and US wants NASA and ISRO to work together in few of the future missions as well. So that is something that showcases how India, remember that cartoon coming in from New York Times where India was shown as someone who does not deserve to be there. Now US wants partnering with India. That is something that has come a long way. So this is how India and US are partnering. A long statement coming in, all praises for India's G20 presidency and how India can be the game changer.
All right, Rishabh, stay with us. In fact, I'm going to keep coming back to you for more updates right through the day today and tomorrow, as we in fact break down for our viewers all of the developments of the G20 and bring you all the latest interviews and breaking news in relation to that. But let's focus for a moment on China. Now, the focus of this entire G20 meet, particularly the absence of Xi Jinping, has been a major talking point. Now, the absence of Xi Jinping has been something that has been discussed, it has been speculated, but what is very clear is that India has been sending out a very clear and unequivocal message to China over the past several days. Even at the ASEAN recently, the Prime Minister, without naming China, very clearly referred to the fact that there has to be an international rules-based order when it comes to the South China Sea, and that was perhaps one of the strongest messages that was going in. Even the platform of the United Nations has in fact been very effectively used by India to put China in the dock, with the statement of Ruchira Kamboj, who represented India over there, talking about the role, particularly when it comes to organizations that have been supporting terror. And clearly, of course, the evidence-based proposals of blacklisted terrorists being blocked time and again, raising questions. Listen to what India has to say.
The working methods of the United Nations Security Council sanctions committees continue to dent the credibility of the UN Security Council. For genuine, evidence-based listing proposals for globally sanctioned terrorists to be blocked without giving any due justification is uncalled for and smacks of doublespeak when it comes to the Council's commitment in tackling the challenge of terrorism.
Now, this latest attack also comes in the backdrop of China's latest belligerence, and particularly what many are calling cartographic war or cartographic aggression, given the fact that it's not just India, but several countries, including Japan, Vietnam, Taiwan, all in fact have spoken about in terms in the past about their territorial sovereignty in some way being challenged, and in this case, with this kind of a map being released, certainly, of course, incensing several other countries as well. However, the larger question is the fact that we have seen in the past how External Affairs Minister has very clearly denied all of these claims and has called on the opposition as well as China's agenda and has in fact tried to expose it in the past as well. This is what External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has maintained.
Whatever has happened in the last 3 years. Whenever our disengagement has led to any outcome, which it has, we had a disengagement on Galwan, we had a disengagement on Pangong So, we had one on PP15, PP17A. We have actually gone to Parliament and made a statement to Parliament. Defence Minister has made a statement to Parliament. Now, obviously, when there is a live military situation, no government is going to put out, where the troops are deployed, in what numbers they are deployed, etc., unless you are wanting to help the other side, which I hope none of us do.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
All right, before I go across to our guests on the subject, of course, that we're discussing, which is of China, I want to quickly get in a word from Sushant Sareen. Sushant, how do you look at this particular statement? Anything out of the ordinary? Of course, the very fact that the Prime Minister and the US President are meeting within a short span of 3 months, now something that does not happen very often, clearly there is significance attached to that. And right after his landing, the very first meeting being, of course, that bilateral meeting that was held in Lok Kalyan Marg, a special dinner also being held over there. But in terms of the statement itself, if you were to break it down, what are the takeaways? Sushant, sorry.
Madhav, I'm afraid I've not been able to read the statement because I was on another show. So I haven't been able to read the statement. But I think the very fact that President Biden lands in Delhi and the first thing he does is has a bilateral with the Prime Minister. And if you look at the body language of the president, both when he lands as well as when he meets the Prime Minister, I think it tells you a lot about the state of relationships between India and the United States. That is one. Secondly, I would imagine that both sides are coordinating much more closely, not just on G20, but also, pushing forward with the bilateral agenda between the two countries. Now, since I've not read the statement, I can only speculate. I would imagine that there would have been a lot of conversation on
some of the pointers I can in fact highlight. We just broke it on the top of the show. They've reaffirmed the close partnership. The statement has appreciated the substantial progress. US has acknowledged the success of PM's US visit. Groundbreaking achievements of the historic visit have been spoken about, and he's also congratulated India for Chandrayaan 3. So these are some of the statements coming in. Let me ask Abhijit to weigh in on this. Abhijit, how do you view this particular statement coming in?
It seems pretty anodyne right now. But I never expected something particularly big to come out in the beginning. I think all the big statements will come out later during the summit. The beginning is never, even diplomatically, even if they've agreed to something, they will not announce it at the beginning of a summit, because you always, like during Diwali, you always burst the small crackers first and you keep the big crackers right for the end. So it's like that.
Okay. Perhaps that's an apt analogy in this particular case. But let me go across to some of our other panelists who are with us. Einar Tangen is a senior fellow at the Taipei Institute and chairman of Asia Narratives. Einar Tangen, if I can begin by asking you, sir, the fact that Mr. Xi Jinping is not here, or I think we've lost that line with Einar Tangen. Let me try and see if we have Andrew K P Leung with us. Do we have Mr. Andrew K P Leung with us? And Mr. Leung, if I can begin by asking you, the last several days, India has, of course, been sending out its messages, but it's not just India. The recent map that was put out, there were problems, not just India, but several other countries. It is Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Taiwan, Indonesia, Nepal, and Russia had a problem with that. There are several European countries which are talking about, including United States and UK, also talking about de-risking or decoupling. There are recently countries that have been falling into a debt trap due to China, such as Sri Lanka. Expansionism in South China Sea has been a big problem, a serious matter of concern in Indo-Pacific and East Asia. Belligerence vis-a-vis Taiwan is another issue. Encroaching on Indian territory is an issue here in India. And, this bellicose behavior, seeking to lay claim in Senkaku Islands has been a source of tensions between Japan and China. So there are many countries globally who are saying that China is increasingly, while it may be becoming aggressive from its own perspective, the problem is that a lot of countries, we've seen how vocal Australia, for instance, has been. Japan has traditionally been very vocal, but more and more countries that appear to be having problems. And India, of course, just one of them. At this point of time, perhaps somewhere China afraid of the kind of prominence or limelight that India is in at this moment. And perhaps that's why Mr. Xi Jinping isn't here. That's one of the theories that's being proffered. How do you look at it, Mr. Leung?
Well, naturally, all countries have got their own specific strategic interests and sovereignty, either claims or sovereignty issues. And that's why when these different countries' claims crash, you're bound to have something like a crisis, for example, over Ukraine. There's no doubt that, of course, the global south is rising. And the main agenda of this multinational forum, the G20, is in fact regarded as a forum for the global south, and where the United States wants to regain its leadership position of the global south at a time when some of its practices are viewed with skepticism or with concern. And of course, India and China like to adopt a more influential position in the global south. So this forum is really a battlefield for the hearts and minds of the global south, as it were. Now, I highlighted some of the conflicts. Of course, what is the major problems the world is facing? Of course, the first one is the Ukraine war, and secondly is the historical 360 degrees confrontation between the United States and China, anything short of hot war. And that's why presidency has chosen not to attend this meeting and sending instead a prime minister. But China, don't forget, has come back recently from a very successful multinational forum with the ASEAN countries, and also are coming at the back of a very successful platform with the so-called BRICS Plus summit, where more and more countries want to line up to join the BRICS Plus group. Those suggest that the dynamics are changing, and as far as the United States is concerned, it's instructive that President Biden, before coming to the show, before coming to the forum, in fact has lined up certain initiatives. For example, the global infrastructural initiative, and trying to promote the Western kind of standards and, or if you like, a narrative to bring it into the platform. So I think that in face of all these fractious confrontation, it's not an easy job to get a common statement, but it would be a pity for the summit to end without an agreed consensus. So I think the trick of the diplomacy is to focus on the highest or the lowest common denominator, and focusing on large areas of common interest. For example, climate change, for example, the instability of the global finances, and also the need for more financial aid for the developing nations. So I think that rather than highlighting all these
the big question in that regard is whether China is going to play spoiler, and the United States certainly believes so. We've seen what the NSA of the United States has said just for about 48 hours ago. But let me bring in Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni on that. Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, how do you see this? Of course, there are strategic interests, there are domestic interests, there are, of course, international issues that have to be resolved. But many would say that China, and the fact that Mr. Xi Jinping isn't here, the first time that he's, not attended a G20 summit since 2012, since he's taken charge, and also, of course, many questioning about whether China would actually try to play spoilsport at a multilateral, at a global event such as this.
Madhav, thank you. I think at the very outset, it works both ways. Spoilsport also, and may have been domestic compulsions also, because as it appears so that he seems to have been ticked off by the elders in China, primarily for the kind of inflation, the unemployment that's taking place, their own real estate not doing as well as it is expected, and things of those kinds. And obviously, Xi Jinping, from the time he's taken over from 2013, that continuous, sort of violation of all the agreements that have been signed with China, be it 93, 96, 2007, and subsequently, and much that had gone with good relations with China for a long time, and suddenly all they did from 2020 onwards and from Galwan, well, we know that things have gone wrong, absolutely wrong. And today, of course, the relations with China aren't good, whatever be the reasons. Now everybody knows the expansionist policies of the Chinese, insisting on violation of sovereignty, not sort of following any of the treaties that have been signed between the two countries. So there is a lot that is to be said. And now to top it up, you have the cartographic aggression coming at the wrong time. Not just that, of course, in international relations, there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. But notwithstanding all that, I think the Chinese have not been playing. And probably the Chinese may have at some time maybe feeling that India seems to be growing economically. It seems to be now, technologically going leaps and bounds. The very fact that it has now be able to land on moon, that too for the first time in the world on the South Pole, that all, and the way Indian leadership also trying to bring the global South. Now, there are certain things I don't think the Chinese probably appreciated. Now, the leadership doesn't appreciate the way India goes about it. Whether the way India has been seen as a leader of global South. We had 125 countries represented over 10 sessions for 2 days, all of them during their, even imagine objections to having Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam as the motto for G20 was being objected to. So these are certain things which show that the Chinese leadership, and all along, they're probably feeling that they are superior and that they count first and Indians come next. Now that kind of a relationship and with the two civilizations are.
So is it a superiority complex, or is it a fear of growth of the Indian stature internationally? What really is the big problem? And let me take this across to Inar Tangent, Senior Fellow of the Taihe Institute and Chairman of Asia Narratives. Is it that Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni refers to some kind of feeling of superiority? Is it a feeling that India may upstage China at this particular platform, or is it the response that Prime Minister Modi gave at this particular East Asia Summit, where he refers to and invokes international law, including UNCLOS, or the United Nations Convention on Law and Sea, saying that it applies equally to all countries, where there's freedom of navigation and overflight, and where there is unimpeded lawful commerce for the benefit of all, and also talking about the code of conduct that should be effective for the South China Sea. Very clearly a response, Mr. Inar Tangent, to what was perceived to be an act of cartographic war a few days before that.
Has put out a very controversial map. Obviously, there are a lot of countries that have objected to it. The question is why they did it. Obviously, they knew there would be some controversy, and the question is it a reverse negotiating posture? If it is, we'll see how it goes. I don't think that it's necessarily been the best move, but we'll see how it works out. In terms of the law of the seas, what happened is the United States wanted to enlarge its territories beyond what was called the traditional cannon shot rule, which was 13 nautical miles. Basically how far you could, throw a cannonball in those days. It wanted extraterritorial gains. It set in motion what became the UNCLOS, which the United States did not join, but which the United States feels entitled to enforce on other countries. China, just prior to joining on to UNCLOS, passed a law internally saying that areas of historical interest were not subject to the UNCLOS. Question of legal matters. I'm a lawyer. It certainly can be litigated. But at this juncture, you have a standoff. What happened was that everyone made a land grab. Everyone is complaining that China did this, that, and the other thing. But the fact is, almost all the countries involved have, in essence, tried to, literally grab areas, ram ships into features and, kind of man them, or in Vietnam's case, actually grab islands and put things on them. So right now, this is not just mainland China. Also, Taiwan maintains the same exact territorial rights, and it has to be settled diplomatically, not militarily.
Okay. Let me bring in Sushant Sareen on another point. Sushant Sareen, we've seen how India has sent its former service chiefs to Taiwan. Somewhere or the other, do you think that is also a contributory factor in terms of, if I can calling it, the tensions between the two countries increasing in the past days?
Well, it certainly would have added to the kind of irritation that the Chinese would be feeling. Because after all, the Chinese don't want anybody to be interacting with the Taiwanese, and certainly not senior officials or very, very senior officials of the armed forces engaging with the Taiwanese. That is one. But I think, Madhav, what we also have to see is that by refusing to come to India, for example, I think the Chinese president is only isolating himself, and something which we should welcome. If they want to isolate themselves from the rest of the world, which is something which they've not done ever since G20 started. But if they now want to start isolating themselves and they want G20 to become G18 or G19, fine. I don't think we would have any problems with it. The more the Chinese withdraw from the international system, even the better for us, frankly speaking. The other thing is that most of the tensions in the region have... Look, I agree with the two gentlemen who say that, when these maps come out, there are contesting claims, which is fair enough. That happens between many countries. I don't have a problem with that. The problem is that when the Chinese come up with these kind of maps, they first come up with these maps, then they start establishing a claim on the basis of these maps, and then they say they go back about 5,000 years, 20,000 years, 1 lakh years, and say that, this has always been a part of China. Even when China never existed, this was a part of China. And then they start acting in a belligerent manner. They put in forces, they intimidate their neighbors. They do all those activities. So which is why I think that pushback is coming as stridently as it has started coming, even from countries like Philippines, from Indonesia, from Malaysia. Vietnamese have never been on the best of terms with the Chinese. The Japanese have been trying to play it cool, but even they have now opposed it, and we, of course, right? So that is the second. The third is, in China, if it actually wants to play as this big player on the global scene, actually interested in tackling, for example, terrorism. Now, Sajid Mir is a guy who has been found involved in the 26/11 attacks. Are the Chinese saying that it's perfectly fine if 160 Indians are killed by terrorists and the master planner is not to be designated a terrorist because he's a Pakistani? Is that the Chinese position? Now, the Pakistanis themselves have arrested the man, not only arrested him after doing all kinds of, jiggery pokery, shenanigans, all kind of dissemble for which the Pakistanis are infamous for. They even declared the man dead. Then they took out his body from the graveyard and they took him to court. They even convicted him on charges of terrorism.
Okay.
Now, they have convicted him, but the Chinese say we need more evidence to say that this guy is an international terrorist. Now, after that...
Very important questions, and they deserve an answer, Sushant. So, allow me to bring in Andrew Leung on that. Andrew Leung, two very important points that Sushant has made. One, it's not just the cartographic aggression or the changing of maps, but we've seen in the past how this has been followed by, military being pushed in and all sorts of actions being taken to physically contest and claim the land. This is something that has been experienced by several countries in Asia, and that's why you're seeing a belligerent position. From India's point of view, terrorists on whom Pakistan has acted, China has a problem if there is some international rule that is invoked and action is taken. Why should that even be the case if they're committed to taking on terror? Andrew Leung.
Well, territorial disputes between China and India have existed for a very, very long time. And then there are ups and downs and now more downs and up in the relationship. But definitely the G20 is not a forum to address territorial disputes, nor is it a forum to address geopolitics. It is a forum largely to address the main challenges faced by the world. And what are the main challenges at the moment is the war in Ukraine and its disruption of the world's supply and value chain. So I think that for this G20 forum, it would be incumbent on the host to really achieve the largest common agreement amongst the developing world in particular. Don't forget that China, in spite of the earlier remark that China tries to exclude itself.
Andrew Leung, are you saying that those who are not the host can go about with their aggression? It's only the host that has to sit down quietly and listen to whatever is happening from its neighbors?
China remains the largest trading partner of 128 countries in the world, the largest trading partner, compared with only 58 of the United States. So it's impossible for China to exclude itself. So China is determined to play a more influential role. But what I'm trying to say is the G20 is not a forum to address
and there are many countries talking about decoupling and de-risking also, sir. So that's also a very important point. Let me bring in Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Abhijit Iyer Mitra, do these arguments of Mr. Leung make sense? Because on the one hand, he would have us believe it is in the host's interest to, be quiet, be patient, try and accommodate everyone's interest. But that certainly is not practical in today's day and age when you have a country that is literally announcing its territories as your own, when you have a country that's continuing with its aggression, and even when it comes to trade, sure enough, China is way ahead of India when it comes to its global trade and its share of countries where it's the #1 trading partner. But that is poised to change with a number of countries saying we're too invested in China. They're talking about de-risking, they're talking about decoupling, and that is happening from Europe to several countries, including even the example of Sri Lanka that's right next to us and in front of us.
Look, I've heard a lot of talk of decoupling and de-risking. I've seen very little movement towards it. I've seen movement possibly in the longer term, which, depends. China just needs to price certain things a certain way, and it manages to make a lot of things unprofitable for the de-risking, or make the de-risking cost a significant bit more. Number one. Number two, unfortunately, as a host, you really have to be on a good behavior. Hosts can't afford to throw tantrums. And I want to point out here, we're not the ones throwing a tantrum. The only person holding a multilateral forum hostage to bilateral issues here is Xi Jinping in China. He chose not to come because things at the BRICS summit did not go his way, especially on the border issues that were being spoken about. Subsequently, they issued that bizarre map of theirs. And of course, like Sushant pointed out, when you ask them about what the cartographic basis for this is, it's usually some late Ming or early Qing dynasty maps. Usually early Ming dynasty maps, which they claim were made by Zhang He or people like that, with projections that don't conform to any modern cartographic standards.
So it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, unfortunately, in terms of the actions that we are seeing, Abhijit. I'm sorry to interrupt you because we're completely out of time. Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Sushant Sareen, Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, as well as Andrew P. Leung. I'd like to thank all of you as well as Ena Tangent for joining us. All eyes, of course, on what the outcome of this G20 summit will be. The government sources have been indicating that there has been tremendous amount of progress as far as the Sherpas are concerned, their talks are concerned. But finally, of course, it will be up to the world leaders. And will there be a Delhi declaration? Will there be breakthroughs that will be spoken about as to what happened in New Delhi? That would be perhaps the moment that all are waiting for. I'd like to thank all of you gentlemen for joining us this evening.